Right, there's been a lot of talking over the last 24, 48 hours after Liverpool's 3-0 loss at home to Nottingham Forest. A lot of people putting out their theories as to where they think the club is going, where they think the club should go, who they think they should bring in next, whether that someone should be the next person to bring in, and whether Arne even has an option of bringing this back at this point. And I think there is one thing that everyone agrees on broadly, and it's unacceptable for Liverpool, with their aspirations, whether you thought they were title aspirations at the start of the season or not, to lose 3-0 at home to Nottingham Forest. Nottingham Forest, regardless of points total, very, very good side, definitely deserve respect and definitely a respectable side in terms of the quality they have in there. But it's nothing to do with it's Forest. It's to do with the nature of the loss. It's, obviously there is an element of them being in the bottom half of the table, the bottom three of the table, but you also have to look at the fact that, that was clearly not the way that things were going. And I think there is something to factor in there about the Premier League this season, about small margins making huge differences. And Liverpool having some of these small margins, obviously not going their way. You can always only pick certain margins that you win on because you have to compromise somewhere out there on the football pitch. But at the same time, also having fairly big factors for me, which seem like indicators that Liverpool are still in transition this season, still changing things, still working out new tactics, new ideas. And that actually, while we find ourselves in this halfway house that I keep talking about, it's probably not a smart idea to judge Slot, to judge these new players, or also to judge the trajectory of the club right now. So I just kind of wanted to talk about some of these theories. There have been a few people who've kind of been quite aggressive, really, on Twitter. A few guys, really just abusing me for saying I thought it was a bit unreasonable to criticise Slot, at least in terms of going as far as saying he should not be at the club anymore. I think he's certainly worthy of criticism, but I think saying, sack him, frankly, just feels a little bit beyond the pale. And I think there are some people who are saying, well, he's had these results, we've had this many losses, it's humiliating. I think in the short term, sure. And if your account is maybe showing that you are a hyperbolic person from a place that doesn't particularly have any attachment or care about Liverpool, and really all you care about is your ego being satisfied on Twitter or your ego being satisfied on YouTube comments, then we will fundamentally disagree on most things, because you and I don't have the same perspective on our football club. If your account, say I click the profile on your Twitter and it shows that you are a person who is clearly a troll and you're clearly not invested in the club. You're invested in battling other people, and you only picked Liverpool because it was, a good avatar, or it was, a good player to have, and you're whatever. We're not supporting the club from the same background. But there are also some people, very reasonably, puddles of LFC. Someone who's been quite abusive to me in comments recently. There's an Irish guy. I mean, maybe we do have different involvements. Maybe he's even more involved than I am. Saying, I think Laurence is a fairly offensive word about this, and we should, saying we shouldn't criticise Slot. Of course we should criticise Slot. Of course we should criticise this kind of halfway house that we find ourselves in. But I don't think it's only Slot. And I think that, criticism we've kind of gotten into a bit of a space in the YouTube and the online scene where we go, well, we've got to criticise. And I agree. I think criticism he's worthy of criticism here. But I think if we know that a manager is sticking around, and we know that there is a wider plan, which I think feels fairly evident to me because big-time players have been sold on this. Other players are still due to be sold, I think probably in January, if not at the end of the season, to get the highest value for them. Konate's probably going to leave on a free. Then we know that this is not the full hit of what is coming for this Liverpool side. And I also think it's perfectly reasonable to say that if Liverpool let go of Slot today, another team would snatch him up, frankly. Not only another, kind of reasonable side, like a top team. We're talking Barcelona levels of team here, if say they wanted to move on. So that for me is an indicator that this guy is top level. And I think maybe some of those teams would snatch him up because Liverpool snatched him up at one point, right? But my point is really, he is a top coach. And I think some things are changing. I think I have seen change in this Liverpool side. But the thing that really shifted it for me was the comments from Virgil van Dijk. And the comments with him saying the dressing room needs to get this together. A lot of journalists said post-game, and I agree with them, the comments that he made seemed pointed towards the Liverpool dressing room and seemed kind of geared towards the players who he didn't feel were committing, or the players that he didn't feel performing to their maximum, or the players that he plays alongside who aren't currently head in the game locked in. Now, I'm only assuming who I think that is, right? Because I can only do that. He didn't name them. But I think you can clearly see that Liverpool and Van Dijk in particular feel that while they're at the club, you have to show a certain level of commitment. You have to show that you're committed to Liverpool and the joint cause, the collective cause of what we're trying to achieve. Unlike Trent, no reason to call him a rat, no reason to be abusive towards him, but he wasn't committed towards the collective results that Liverpool want because he wanted to go to another club. It's nothing personal, but Van Dijk clearly had a level of contempt or whatever it is for the decision that Trent Alexander-Arnold made, and he felt maybe let down by that, as many people did. Whether Trent felt that way or not is almost irrelevant to that. Like, I know that we want to have a long-term great relationship with all of our players and we want to feel like we've got this closeness with all these guys and we'd love to be able to welcome people back. And at some point, I'm sure we will welcome Trent back. But realistically, if we're just sitting around being nice about the performances that Konate is putting in and the performances that Kirkez is putting in, and the performances that Salah's putting in, Kirkez, I think, is probably the most explicable of all of those because he is new to the club. It's a very difficult, different role for him. Even though Iraola got very good results from him last season in a very, what we would have assumed was a similar role, we need to call that out. And I think Van Dijk doing that showed to me that it isn't about just the manager or the manager in this. It is actually about the players and the collective of those guys enacting the tactics and being on point. And Slot, when you marry these comments with his, kind of backs that up. And I think what he talks about is these small margins that Liverpool are losing by. And I think in the Premier League at the moment, if you just go through the weekend results, you can see these small margins make a massive difference, right? I'm going to go up here. Leeds United lost to Aston Villa, small margins. But the big one was Arsenal versus Tottenham. Tottenham turned up with very outdated tactics. And Arsenal absolutely blew them away. I think Arsenal have been great this year, but I don't think they've been exceptional. I think the results have been exceptional, but I've never watched them and really felt like blown away by the football until the Tottenham result. And even then, I feel like Tottenham were particularly poor. But that's not to take away from the achievement that Arsenal have. It's more to say, I think Arsenal aren't really being challenged this year in the same way as I'd imagine some people felt about Liverpool last year. Newcastle, Man City, small margins. City missed a lot of big opportunities. That could have been a complete result the other way, but they wasn't that way. Palace obviously beat Wolves. Liverpool obviously lost 3-0 to Forest. Chelsea beat Burnley. There are plenty of results in there, but have been plenty of results where managers are getting tactically caught out. And I think what I also saw when you marry Virgil van Dijk's comments with Slot's approach to talking about, the small margins, he will turn it around, all these kind of things, married with this other idea of when I saw Rion Gamoa come on, I thought he did exceptionally from that side of the field. I thought he had brilliant take-ons. I thought he came up with some great end results. I thought Liverpool looked a lot more front-footed, and maybe it was a little late, and maybe some people are calling those garbage minutes. But I also think there are some other players that came on and performed, better, and it made a big difference to Liverpool. So, again, I'm not going to criticise because I think there are still some transitional moments. I think Salah looks so isolated from this team. I think Konate, with the smirk as he came off, I was like, what's that meant to mean? Like, how are we meant to interpret a wry smile as you walk off a field after a really, honestly, terrible performance on that day? So there's a lot of confusing factors, and I think a lot of people are reading into them. I'm reading into them as well, and I'd love to know what your thoughts are on that. And then I'd also love to know what people think about basically the way that this team is performing at the moment. Like, is it actually possible to turn this around? Is it possible for Slot to go from kind of where he is right now to a positive this season? And I personally think it is, because I think the results have been very patchy, but we've also seen us beat Villa, not City, we got very much thrashed by City, but Real Madrid in that time, and we've seen good results, good systems coming to just a good end result for Liverpool. And the thing that frustrated me in that time was I thought, so we do have tactical application, we do have application, but at the moment what we're seeing is we only seem to see the players apply it when things are going their way. Now, some people would argue that is very much on slot to motivate the players to get into a point where they are going to perform and to get into a point where they will, get the best out of this team. But at the same time, there has to be some responsibility on these players. And I think what frustrates me is people are thinking about the short term and winning something this season. They're saying, should Steven Gerrard be the manager of Liverpool? Guys, Steven Gerrard is he's a brilliant Liverpool legend, but he's not a 5-year Liverpool manager. He's not managed at the top level for as long as we want him to have this contract the opposite way. Some people are talking about, well, I would take Iraola, I would take Glasner, I would take any of these guys. Do you really think that Iraola would come in and change things so dramatically for Liverpool? Would he solve the fullback positions that we have? I don't see, maybe he changed them slightly, but I don't see how he would change the player fundamentally. Would he change the striking options that we currently have? Has he managed anyone of that level? Arguably not any different to anywhere where Slot is. Would he change the midfield situation? Possibly, but would it change what Liverpool are doing? Would it complement Florian Wirtz? All these kind of questions. No. Would Glasner play a slightly more pragmatic style of football? Possibly, but would that mean compromise in big games? Have any of these guys had to break down a low block in the way that we've seen Liverpool and other teams have to do? I don't arguably think so. And the same goes for anyone, there are plenty of other managers I'm sure we could bring in, but there will be a acclimatization period, there will be a period of adjustment for Liverpool, and I'm sure there will be a new manager bounce at some point, there always is. But at the same time, a new manager bounce has to come after a particularly negative experience and not wanting that manager to be there. And at the moment, some people are saying, Liverpool have down tools, etc., etc. Some people are using very specific stats and very tailored stats to show, and very tailored graphs to show that Liverpool have down tools under Slot. And I don't think they have just yet. I am looking for those indicators. I'm obviously seeing moments of kind of contempt from Konate, but then I'm seeing the opposite coming out of Van Dijk. And I think I've got my idea of who's committed to this club, at least for the medium term, and then in the short term, not Konate. I'm also seeing that I think overall, Liverpool are committed to Slot because, who else is going to come in and change this? And my frustration comes when I see in the comments that people are, you just dismissing these things, or, you're not committed to the idea of Liverpool being their best. We have a great squad, guys. And I'm sure that if Liverpool feel that there is this kind of need to move Slot on, they'll make that decision. They make very hard decisions. What I particularly appreciate, though, is, first of all, FSG are totally the kind of people to stick with the manager and stick with difficult times because they know that there is something else to come, right? So I totally get that. They will battle their way through this. They will not just go, we lost at Anfield, therefore we get rid of the manager. I think the only time they really do that is when they think that mentally the players have moved on. But I think that when people are talking about difficult decisions for Slot and, who we replace Slot with, I think the bigger question should be, who are we replacing Konate with? Who are we replacing Salah with? Who are we going to replace, someone like McAllister possibly in this midfield with? And I think there are some big shape changes, some big tactical changes coming for Liverpool. We see them trying to pack that midfield. We see them trying to play kind of an adaptable front line. We see some of the principles coming in, and I think the shape change will follow that. A lot of people now getting on this boat with the 3-5-2, blah, blah, blah. That was something we were speaking about for quite some time now on this channel because we've seen that. And I can't say that I have an inside track at Liverpool for managerial sackings, but we did hear about this 3-5-2 particularly early. So what I'm saying is I think there is a shift coming at Liverpool. And I think it requires tactical adaptation for a lot of these players. It requires tactical acumen for a lot of these players. The principles to be drilled into these guys. And that does worry me a little bit in the sense that I think that does take time. But I also think that the phrase trust the process very much comes up here for me. And I think, Richard Hughes has very much been through the process. Michael Edwards very much been through the process. Arne Slot very much been through the process. And if I saw people panicking, if I saw people, if I saw a club that felt like it was kind of in a tailspin, I would feel very different about this. But people are saying, it's Manchester United now. you've not watched Liverpool for a very long time if you think this is a Manchester United side. You've not watched Manchester United for a very long time if you think this Liverpool side is comparable. And I think, yeah, there was an expectation that Liverpool would perform and that we would just plug these players in and go. And I think a lot of people thought that was because we would plug into this idea of, like, you know, the manager just keeping the same ideas. But it was very clear to me that we needed to move on from these ideas. And it was very clear to a lot of people, I think, that we needed to move on from these ideas. So mainly because, not because we were getting worked out, because we finished last season relatively, you know, we thrashed a few people, we didn't do so well in others, but we were pretty much on the beach by that point, by the point that we needed to beat other teams like that. And other teams just had higher motivations. We had a title to win. They had Champions League to get. And we won that title. We knew we were close. And I think maybe there is an element of, you know, inertia about this and having a bit of momentum. But overall, I think tough decisions need to be made on players, not on managers. I think we know what the root of the club is, and we know there are some really world-class players in there. So give Arne Slot the time to be able to change this. We were talking about it being January, I think some people saying that, you know, we give Arne Slot until. I don't find that unreasonable. I think there's a good run of games between now and then. I think it's a good time to see indicators of how players are performing, how players are vibing with the new Arne Slot system, and whether it is even Arne Slot's system that he's being asked to implement. Finally, I also think there's a few people talking about Isak being particularly anonymous. I will talk about that completely in another video. But what I will say is I think Slot has gotten good performances out of people in the centre of the field, in Diaz and Diogo Jota, RIP, and Nunez for a couple of games, and multiple different people who have acted as kind of bit part strikers. And I think that result will come with Isak at some point. But Ekitike is similar. And I think actually what we'll end up with is a rotatable front line where sometimes you'll start Gakpo, sometimes you'll start Isak and Ekitike up there. Sometimes we'll start whoever our new winger is, and sometimes we'll start Salah there. I still don't see that we'll use some of these fringe players. And the reason behind that is I just think he has a very consolidated group of players he likes to start and use. And I think it's worthwhile kind of saying, you know, that's because those guys broadly get the tactics. I think we will see the midfield shape change. I think we'll see a back three come in that will become another midfielder when we need it, and a back three when we need it. I think that's why we like Gravenberch. That's why we like, you know, players who can adapt and get into that back line. And that's probably why we're moving on from Konate. I would like to see more Joe Gomez. There is that rumour that we're bringing in Joe Gomez tactically to see how he does, because we are a little bit unimpressed with Konate. And I'm not against that, frankly. I've been really... Konate's probably been my least... my kind of most shocking performances this season, I think, have come from Konate. And my kind of least surprised because of the Real Madrid rumours, but also I'm disappointed because I want to see him have a strong finish to his, what I believe is the end of his Liverpool career now. And I think, finally, there are some people questioning the hierarchy, but I will address this in another video. Richard Hughes, Michael Edwards, those kind of guys. And I think that is these are all reasonable questions to ask because, you know, Liverpool are rebuilding, and I think there was a bit of an assumption that we would get these big players and things would click, but I think Liverpool knew that things wouldn't click straight away. And I think maybe some of us were acting on the assumption that we would just continue the same tactics and the same ideas and some of these principles. And actually what we're doing is Liverpool are now trying to get ahead of the curve, ahead of every other big side in Europe, to try to undermine what it is that's going on tactically at the moment and come out the other side and hit the right timing to do well towards the second half of this season, towards the beginning of next season, and go on to be, you know, kind of a new shape, a new beast in that sense. So let me know what you guys think on that front as well. I'd love to know what you guys think in the comments below tactically where it's going. Some people are saying, oh, they don't think this is realistic. I'm not in a place where I think I'm ready to have a conversation about Slot leaving and someone else coming in, because I don't see the project as being fundamentally flawed because of Slot. I see it being fundamentally flawed because of a lot of other people's input. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'd love to know what your thoughts are. It's interesting to hear people's thoughts down below. There are a lot of great comments on this YouTube studio. So drop me a comment below. I know it's frustrating while Arsenal look better. I know it's frustrating City didn't look better. I know it's frustrating while Manchester United will play Everton probably look better. But there's timelines here. And I think we have to be patient. And to an extent, I think with the success we've had over the last few years, we have to be patient and also enjoy the process, enjoy the rebuild, get behind the players, get behind that changing process, and not be so entitled to think that every season should just be a flawless rebuild and that we go again, because that certainly hasn't been the case for many other teams. And it certainly hasn't been the case for Pep, for Arteta. You know, I know Pep had a pretty good run at things and he had a very good consolidated run, but he had a very good consolidated set of players in that time. And I think there have also now been frustrations at City in recruitment and those kind of things. So I think we should be grateful for where we're at the moment. I think we should be grateful for the fact that Liverpool don't actually sit all that far behind Chelsea and City at this point. And, you know, as much as we are only a couple of points, I think like 3 points ahead of Newcastle right now, and probably, 6 points ahead of Forest, I think it's probably arbitrary to think of Liverpool in terms of progress, in terms of what we're doing, in terms of systems and players and being comfortable. And I think actually we should stop putting pressure on the players to perform immediately and start putting pressure on the players and start putting some support behind the players to enjoy this process, to enjoy being at Liverpool, and not to have this kind of abandonment that I think some people may be kind of indicating towards, or this kind of toxic idea of you need to perform now or you're a terrible player, you need to perform now or you're a terrible manager. I don't think that's a stupid way to act, frankly. And I think a lot of people who are saying, oh, you know, we're not being realistic in saying, you know, Slot's a bad manager, a good manager, or whatever. Maybe he isn't the guy, maybe he isn't. And I'm more than willing to explore that when I see those indicators. But I'd love to know what you guys think is a key indicator, and I mean a really visible, obvious indicator that Slot has lost the dressing room or is not a good candidate for getting Liverpool to the position we need them to be, and who you think is better. Why you think there's a better person there than Slot for some of these roles, for some of these ideas. So let me know in the comments below, and of course, I'll be down there with you guys. I'll chat to you in a little while. There is a Discord, of course. There is a Patreon and a membership on this channel. Patreon gives us a better split. The membership, of course, keeps you on YouTube if you want to stay here. So I'll see you guys in the Discord absolutely free, and I'll chat to you in a little while. Much love.